Welcome everyone to 5 sales tactics for success in today's tough selling market. I'm Craig Rosenberg. I'm the Chief Platform Officer here at Scale Venture Partners, and I'm joined today by our since day one of since I've started sales and revenue consultant Robert Koehler. Robert, I hope you're excited.
Yes, I am, Craig. Thanks.
Awesome. So if you go to the next slide, let me just spend a minute just talking about, at Scale Venture Partners, what our focus as a group is to move organizations from founder selling into go-to-market machines. Our group, which is the go-to-market platform group, we advise organizations, we enable organizations across the entire life cycle from marketing through sales through CS, and move people into this build out of their go-to-market machines. And the way we do that is we do that through a platform of expertise. We have internal folks that work with us, EIRs, such as we've had Matt Amundsen, Sydney Sloan. We now have Minnie Perez, as well as Brandon O'Sullivan. We have we extend that group of people like Robert, and then we extend it further with our go-to-market network, which has practitioners that have been there, done that. And the result is, we advise the portfolio on key issues, we create content, and we do events just like this. So I'm very excited to send this over to Robert. Before I do, I just want to say kind of the impetus for this. So Robert, like it or not, listens to a lot of phone calls. It has for the last couple of years. So he's seen not just what's happening now, but what was happening before. And I'm in the same boat, and I've heard lots of different things happening. And we wanted to take that because Robert has been taking all these findings and kind of what's happening in the market and what he's hearing on calls and putting that together, because definitely some trends have emerged here that have allowed him to put together some best practices that allow you to sell in this wild market. So with that, I'm going to hand that over to Robert. And Robert, why don't you take it from here, and then I'll interrupt you when we need to.
Okay, thanks so much, Craig. Today's selling environment is very combustible, and it's not lost on anyone, Craig, that it's a tough environment today and tough economic environment. We have engagement scarcity. It's really hard to get to buyers. Gartner has done research showing that the actual time most sales teams get to engage during a sales process with a buyer is less than 10%. So we're getting significantly fewer at bats as sellers. Second, there's attention scarcity disorder. And you probably all noticed that when we do get the time, it's hard to get and maintain attention, particularly with the glut of information, the glut of communications. Executives are getting emails, Slack, phone calls, texts. There's multitasking, and everyone's trying to do more with less. And the economy, Craig, is not only forcing companies and sales teams to achieve the same results with fewer resources, it's changing how buyers behave. Increasingly, they're avoiding risk. They're cloaking themselves in consensus. We have to talk to a lot more buyers. Any purchases are being increasingly scrutinized. CFOs are coming in for substantially smaller deals. And as all of you have probably experienced, particularly in the last 2 quarters, a lot of companies are kicking the can down the road. So none of that is probably news to anyone here. What it means, though, is that we've got to be really sharp on the sales fundamentals. Every meeting, every buyer engagement, every call has to capture the buyer's attention, provide them value, and be effective. And based on listening to over 100 calls in the last 9 months, here's the bad news. Just when we need to thread the needle and be at the top of our craft and increase our batting average and the fewer, tougher at-bats that we have, there is a staggering loss of fundamentals. And by sales fundamentals, I mean things like pre-call research, asking timely questions, personalizing and customizing messaging, multi-threading versus single threading, identifying if we have a champion, all those things. And we've been talking about these fundamentals for years. And my experience, particularly over the last year, is that it's not happening. Despite all the preaching about the importance of the basics, a lot of sellers and revenue organizations are paying the piper. Bravado did a lot of interesting research. They found in Q4 at the end of last year, less than 25%, less than 1 in every 4 sellers hit quota. Last year, on average, the average company quota attainment was only 75%, 3/4 of the way there. And they found that missed revenue targets were the driving factor behind 40% of companies conducting layoffs. Wow. So, Craig, there is good news, which is the reason we're here today. There are tools, tactics, and frameworks that sellers and sales teams can use to combat some of the trends that are happening in the industry today. And I'm excited to share a few of those with you today. To give you some actionable tools that you all can walk away with and start to apply to improve the fundamentals and combat these trends. So first, I want to introduce the big 3 selling process. And what it is very simple. You identify a buyer's 3 biggest challenges and run the rest of the sales process against those challenges. Their big goal and their 3 big barriers to achieving the goal. It may sound overly simple, and I hope by the end of the day, you'll see that it's applicable. And the big 3 selling process can be used with any sales methodology or process, from Medic to MedPick to Challenger. And it really leverages the rule of 3 to simplify execution and thread buyer engagement together all the way from pre-meeting research to post-sales adoption. And it includes several tools that can be implemented individually or together. And I'll be reviewing those specific tools that are all aligned to the big 3 selling process, as well as an important component today, without which none of this will really work or work very well. So to help revenue organizations combat the trends that make today's selling tough, there's really a transformation that is happening in the marketplace. And what I see predominantly in company sales processes and buyer engagements is a series of ad hoc, disjointed sales actions that sellers struggle to execute and buyers struggle to understand the engagement. And what I mean by disjointed actions, what that looks like is sales calls that don't reference, tie to, or build upon previous sales calls, and new people from the seller's organization that hopscotch or parachute into the engagement that don't really understand the buyer's business and don't personalize the messaging. So in today's combustible, complex environment, the key to success is make things simple. Make it simple for sellers, make it simple for buyers. It's not keep it simple, it's make it simple. So the big 3 I've found transforms the entire sales cycle. And I want to give you an idea of sort of where we are and what it can lead to based on watching companies implement the big 3 process. Really, the big 3 ties together and transforms the entire sales cycle from discovery to demo to proposal. And it moves us from ad hoc questions, feature function dumping, and premature pricing presentations to, thank goodness, guided discovery based on insights, demos, proposals, and meetings that are all aligned to the buyer's main goal and biggest challenges. So I'm going to go through each one of those areas of discovery outcomes, the demo and proposal, and then go into the key component. So discovery is the most important sales stage in the sales process. And we've talked about this a lot, Craig. It's where we can drive the most value and the most leverage. What I'm seeing though is that a lot of deals are dying at discovery. Don't mistake me, they advance on the forecast beyond discovery. However, because sellers don't capture the important information, they don't frame the issues, ask good questions, or provide questions that tie together, or even more fundamentally understand the buyer's problem. They're missing the critical information that make those later sales stages and later sales meetings valuable and impactful. So I want to introduce to you a tool that I've worked on in companies to help them, and it's prescriptive discovery. And over the course of listening to all these calls, I found the solution to be prescriptive discovery. And here's what I mean by prescriptive discovery. Sellers come armed with 3 hypotheses or perspectives from their company that are developed by the company in advance. They make a statement that offers insight, and they follow that up with a pre-planned question. It's that simple. And in the course of coming in with a perspective and a hypothesis and making a statement and telling them something they haven't heard before or that's not obvious, sellers differentiate themselves by showing themselves to be more prepared, more insightful, and adding more value. And as one of my favorite salespeople, Andy Paul, says, and he ran another webinar yesterday, companies are not buying your product or solution. They're buying you and your organization. So prescriptive discovery is a great way to have some give and take, drive a conversation rather than an interrogation, and differentiate. Sorry, I'm not following the slides here perfectly, Craig. And I want to get into the specific example. And this is an example of one company I worked with. They're a third-party risk management company. And their hypothesis or their bold statement was that third-party networks represent the biggest security risk. And as part of that, they shared that Forrester has found that over 80% of all companies believe that third-party networks represent the greatest security risk to their organization. What are you doing today to tackle this issue? How do you think about it? Stop, pause, let the customer answer. And that's just one example. I'm not going to go through the whole example, but it's a lot different than saying what keeps you up at night. Because the reality, Craig, is that the modern executive of today wants to know what should keep them up at night versus being asked what does keep you up at night. Craig, I'm going to pause there and just see if there's any comments or questions.
I'll just say a couple things. So one is, in the call recordings we listened to on discovery, it seems like sellers are just doing discovery. In other words, they're doing it because it's on the list of things to do. Obviously, they know that they want to capture info, but it's painfully clear that they can't guide. There's no guide, right? So if you ask someone what keeps them, I remember years ago, Charles and my buddy Stu Silverman used to always ask what keeps you awake at night. He'd do it as the first question on the call, and then he says, well, what keeps you awake at night? This guy goes, my kids. What can I do to help you? And so what I liked about this move here to just provide 3 hypotheses and statements is it allows us to guide the conversation, right? So and number 2 is we add value to today's buyer. Like, they don't have time for us. If we come in and we're lazy and we come in and just say, well, what keeps you awake at night? That's not us doing a give get. So we want to be able to provide them that value in order to initiate conversation. And then number 3, I do think well, no matter what, we do want to guide them down the path of what we want to find out from them, right? And so like these statements allow us to do that, right? Based on what we're what we're trying to do. It's a framing mechanism, as Charles said. He's one of the best sales leaders I know. So anyway, I really like this. I've been trying this myself in just regular conversations, just to come into the call with some understanding. And like just the other day, I had a conversation with a guy who had a lot of stuff written, and I brought up one of them and I said, I'd like, I heard something different. I heard this. What would you say to that? It is, as Charles said, a great framing mechanism, and it's a great way to initiate conversation. So I've been a big fan of what you've done here.
Yeah, I mean, the Challenger methodology has been huge. And the whole idea behind Challenger, was teach, tailor, educate. This is a very simplified way of being prescriptive that sellers can understand. And in one or two additional points. One, what is an insight or a hypothesis? It should be something that is not obvious, that not every company can share. It could be based on your proprietary data. It could be based on third-party research. A really simple way for companies and sales organizations to think about it is it can be based on what you're hearing from your customers. So the statement can be, our customers are telling us that they have really underestimated the risk in third-party networks. And so it doesn't have to be rocket science. It is important for anyone listening that you provide those to the sellers versus asking them to come up with those. Second thing I just want to point out, Craig, is that what is the information that we want to capture? We really want to walk away understanding the buyer's goal. What are their big barriers to success? And what are the quantifiable impacts on them and their business to those three big pains or challenges?
Yeah. Really quick. So how would you suggest a enablement or VP of sales or whoever needs to go? How do you build this to enable the reps? Do you take a series of potential hypotheses and provide them with statements, and then they can grab bag them? Is that kind of the idea?
Yes. So the first thing you do is you need a mini brainstorming session. Don't over engineer it. Don't make it a 3-month theoretical project. Get a few people in the room, ideally someone from marketing, someone from sales, even don't forget about customer success, and say, what are the insights or hypotheses that we have to share that are important for our customers to hear? And again, think about the sources of those. They'll typically be what you're learning from customers, what you found in any customer surveys or research, proprietary data that only you have, or third-party research, compelling third-party research that's available on the market. You then, list the 6 different hypotheses, whittle it down to 3, write out a brief statement, fewer words the better, and put in 1 or 2 questions. Then give it to the sellers in a session and have them practice it. And that's really key, Craig, because I don't want to get too far into the weeds on sales enablement. However, not only is there an epidemic of selling fundamentals, but there's an epidemic of lack of practice and continuous coaching. If you just give this to them and expect it to happen, I just say hope is not a strategy. They need to practice it. You need to give them some coaching or evaluation and then have them practice some more so that it feels very fluid.
Great. All right. Now that I've held you up on the first one for 20 minutes, please keep going, and I will turn off my alerts. Keep going.
No, thank you. I appreciate it, Craig. So the next thing is discovery. And essentially, we've forgotten the goal of discovery. I've listened to all of these calls, and to listen to these calls, you'd think, what I hear is, I want to learn more about your business. Or call I heard just a few weeks ago, I want to talk to you today about, network security and third-party risk and discuss our solution. The goal of discovery is to identify their goals, their challenges, or opportunities, if you want to phrase it positively, as well as the impact of those goals and the priority in solving them. That's the goal of discovery. And to listen to these calls, you'd think that the goal of discovery, the way it's being presented today, is the goal is just for us to learn more about your business. How compelling is that for you, Craig, if I call you up and ask that? Or the goal, it sounds like to me that a lot of sellers really have, is just to get to a demo. And I think that's related to the myth of once they just see our solution, they will fall in love and I'm in like Flynn. And that's not the case. So I want to introduce to you the Big Three Discovery Framework, which is something that I've introduced to a number of companies. And this is a tool for reorienting your seller discovery that focuses on what's most important to the buyers, their goals, challenges, and the impacts on their business and them personally. That's what they care about. And so the mantra that I introduced, make it simple. The second mantra I want you to leave with today is love the problem, not the solution. The Big Three Discovery Framework is a way to do that, to assess whether you're doing it well, and to determine where you have gaps. So I'm going to show you an example, and I want to zero in on one part of it. This is the Big Three Discovery Framework. So I'll list the goals, the big three challenges. Where it can really moves the needle is an impact in the impact rating. Because the reality is 90% of sellers never ask a single discovery question around what the impact of the situation is. They're typically pretty good at discovering the goal and some of the challenges, but they don't understand the impact of those challenges and how customers prioritize those, how they prioritize one challenge versus the other, and how they prioritize them in terms of doing anything about them. So I'll give you a quick example just using what we have here. This is a marketing content company selling a marketing content lifecycle solution. And the buyer put down no central searchable view of all the assets and content. True. And what we really did and what they started doing the deal reviews as a result of this Big Three Discovery Framework was asking, why is that important? Digging into the 5 whys. Because as you see here, that's not quantifiable impact. That's really more a statement about the challenge. So by having this framework, you really start to lead and drive sellers. If you're also joining this with Big Three deal reviews and coaching, to more quantifiable impact, which is going to help sellers build a more valuable, tangible business case. You'll also note here in this example that the seller, because this is a live example of what a seller filled out, that they didn't really have a priority between the three. Because at the end of the day, you really want to get a stack rank of the three. So it says that all 3 of these are important. And coming out of this, one of the things I'd really want to find out is what is the most important thing for them, because that's going to start to inform the rest of the engagement. Craig, I'll just pause to check in for your comments and see if there's any questions from the audience.
I think we should. I think the point has been made on the discovery side. I think there's one thing I'll bring up, but as you were talking, that in one of the exercises that I like on impact is that's the type. If you talk about, we're not doing it today, but Big Three deal reviews is, a lot of times a seller who's about, there's a lot of deals that aren't closing. I think we all know that. And it's not, and most of them are just kicking the can, right? It's impossible to sort of pin down the deal. And part of that is because we haven't found an impact that's 8 to 10. And a lot of times we'll run just because without this sort of framework, a seller will hear a challenge, because as you said, the first row, those are actually a reiteration of the challenge, right? everyone working on different systems, and then impact is no central searchable view of all asset. Those are the same thing, right? Instead of digging in and finding something tangible, because the issue is down the line, there are signers now who don't care about what the user or the primary buyer cares about. And people are losing deals because they have to sign off. If we can't get to the impact side and be able to put that on, be able to articulate that, you're going to lose deals down the line. And everyone said, well, it's the the buyer needs help too, right? So we have X number of stakeholders, particularly on the finance side. Let's not just take we have to move the challenges into the impact. And this sort of guide allows them to do that and be more successful down the line.
Yeah. And I've had a number of companies implement this, Craig, and it's helped the sellers have a framework, a simple framework that they can anchor to a little bit more. They get it pretty easily once they see an example it works. And the recommendation I have for everybody where I've seen it work best is pilot this with one seller, have them do it for 2 or 3 deals, and then feature them when you roll this out to the sales team. Because hearing from that seller how they used it and what the benefit was to them will really have a powerful effect and promote change with the rest of the sales team. And the last thing I'll point out about the Big 3 discovery framework, Craig, is that you'll notice that 4/5 of this is all about the buyer. And that's part of saying, love the problem, not the solution. And let's avoid starting to product dump in discovery. All we're checking for here in that last row, the potential solution, is to ensure that the sellers can align the right solution that we're going to go in more depth on to the buyer's challenge. And this is a helpful tool for sales leaders to determine how well sellers are matching solutions to business problems and how well they understand the problem as well as the solution. All right. So moving on to demos. Here's the headline, folks. Demos are still feature function dumps. And listening to all these demos on all these calls that I actively participated on or listened to and evaluated in depth, there's still a lot of feature function dumping going on. It is painful to listen to just as a passionate, interested sales coach. I can't imagine what it was like for some of these buyers to listen to this. And what I'm seeing in general is 3 things. 1, sellers are failing to recap what they understand about the buyer's business and priorities. They're just jumping into the demo. 2, they're not using the start of the demo call as an opportunity to do additional discovery. And with the Big 3 discovery framework, now you've got a tool to allow you to more objectively assess, with the help of others if you choose, what are the gaps in our knowledge? What are the additional discovery questions we need to ask before we jump into the demo? And it's not ABC, it's ABD. It's not always be closing, it's always be discovering and validating our discovery. The third thing I'm seeing is, we talked about engagement scarcity. So it's really hard to get these folks to engage. And a lot of the demos and demo meetings are not engaging. And I'll give you an example of a call that I listened to about a month and a half ago. And this was a company where their quota attainment as a sales organization is under 55%. Their win rates are south of 10%. And I listened to demo calls, and this wasn't just one isolated call. This was across the board. But in this call that really stood out to me was they had a 100K deal, which was really big given their quota attainment. And the seller demoed for 35 minutes before stopping to ask the buyer a single question. They did not share a single story, and they did not share a single example. It was entirely about how the sausage was made and all the fabulous bells and whistles. So I want to introduce to you the Big Three demo framework. And the idea here is to align the demo to the Big Three, to the buyer's primary pains. The Big Three becomes the whole organizing logic for the entire call. So what is the Big Three demo framework? It's an engagement where we first recap our understanding of the basis, we perform additional discovery before jumping into the demo, and then we tightly align everything that we show to the buyer's Big Three challenges. One company now, having implemented this, does not perform any demo without first showing a slide called What We Understand. And to be fair, they were doing some of that before. What the Big Three demo framework did for them is it helped really inform what to put on What We Understand and how to organize it. Goals, challenges, impact. Second, the Big Three demo framework shares focusing on the Big Three for each challenge. We share how we solve the buyer's challenge, not how our product works, how we solve our buyer's challenge, and we tell a story. And in the monastery, while we're showing them how we solve the challenge, we're telling a story about how a customer similar to them with a similar business problem used what we're showing to solve that challenge. And then lastly, to combat the dearth of engagement that I see in a lot of these demo calls, the Big Three demo framework calls out micro and macro closes, which are simply questions to engage the buyer throughout and engage their response. And I'll give you a little bit more detail here in the example. And I'm just going to focus in on the middle part of the Big Three demo. What we're essentially doing is after we've recapped on the additional discovery, we're framing their first big challenge. We're giving context to that challenge in terms of why we may think it exists, what we're seeing with other customers, and then we show how we solve that problem. We share a story around how we solve that specific challenge. And then before we move on to challenge number 2, we do a micro close, which is a fancy way of saying we stop to get the buyer's reaction and confirm that they believe that what we just showed could improve their situation or solve their challenge. Then we rinse and repeat for challenge 2 and 3. So you present the challenge, give it context, show how we solve it, tell a story of how others have solved it, and then pause to ask them what they think. How many times have each of you given or been the victim of a demo in which they never asked for your reaction, or time is out and everybody's running out the door? So the Big Three demo, I think, is a great framework for addressing that. And again, Craig, I'm going to pause just to get your input and what's coming up for you and how it's resonating.
Yeah, I love this. And it's just because there's another issue that I think is really important, which is I don't know if you guys know Reprise. They do the demo automation type software, and they were talking about how, particularly with enterprise software, how the role of the SC has moved to the left. And by the left, they mean further and further up in the sales cycle. And it's because the buyers want to see the product. They want to see it early and they demand it. What the key here is that we can view that as an opportunity, right? Which is, if we want to go through a process like this Big Three demo, then that demo, even if it's early, will allow us, right, to make sure that we're capturing challenges in order to tell the right story. It's not an open invitation to start spitting speeds and feeds, right? So we have a buyer that wants demos. We have an opportunity to take that demo and turn it into a real story. And I've seen this methodology just work great. Even if you even if you do it up front, even if you do it late in the sales cycle, whenever, if you just, you have this mentality that we're going to create 3 storylines through the demo, then it's going to be more, you'll be more successful. And by the way, the last thing I'll mention, I don't know if you remember this, Robert, we used to say was that if we were viewing a demo and the first thing the seller said is, and this is the opening screen, and this is how you log in, then we knew we had a problem. Because that
Yes.
meant they were just going to open the app and walk us all the way through, instead of, here are the 3 things that we've heard from you, and let me walk you through how we might address those in the demo. So anyway, I love this.
Great point. I had a great sales leader, Craig, that would say every time you use the word click here in a demo, the impact of your demo decreases tenfold. All right, so we've talked about discovery, we've talked about demo, and hopefully you're starting to see how just the simple idea of aligning to the rule of 3 and the big 3 mantra starts to tie this together more. And rather than be a series of disjointed actions, starts to weave the whole engagement together. Simpler for the seller to execute, simpler for the buyer to understand. So proposals. What have I seen with proposals? First, a proposal in my mind is nothing more than a summary of a well-run sales process. The only thing that should be new about a proposal, the only new information should be the detail around the pricing. What I'm seeing is a lot of proposals are really just glorified invoicing or pricing presentations, and they're not adding any value. I sometimes like to call this the value first proposal, because the whole idea here is to move away from transactional selling. Here's the price. Do you want to buy? To reinforcing and anchoring to value. If I was buying drywall, that might work. Otherwise, no. And I was listening to a proposal call for a seller that was doing a 6-figure deal, was significant, would have been the 4th biggest deal the company closed that quarter. And their proposal call was 10 minutes. What did they do? They showed the price. They gave them the detail and the SKU, talked about the product features again, and then asked 3 times if there were any questions that they could answer, and closed with the next step of, we would welcome the opportunity to get back on the phone to answer any questions. How much value did that provide? How much did that reinforce the value of the solution? So I want to introduce to you the big 3 proposal. And that is a proposal that begins with and anchors to, probably heard this by now, the buyer's goal, their big 3 challenges, and the quantifiable impact of those challenges. Because as Craig pointed out, and I've alluded to, there's a lot more scrutiny. Those CFOs that coming in, they don't care about the product features and functions. They want to know what the impact's going to be on the bottom line of the business. So let me show you an example. And the whole idea here is, again, it's a summary of a well-run sales process. We want to give the big picture, not just pricing. Caveat here is, for those of you in high volume, high transaction businesses, this might be a little bit of overkill. So I'm going to assume that everybody here is going to adjust based on their particular situation. But the biggest thing is we open with an executive summary and we recap the big 3. Our understanding of their goal, their barriers to success, the impact of those barriers on the business, and then we align our solution to it. And the other thing that's different, particularly for enterprise deals, is we then introduce the customer success plan, or the plan to make them successful, as well as the people that are going to be involved in working with them that are responsible for their success. Why? Because what happens today with a lot of proposals is we reinforce FOMO. And I'm really channeling now Matt Dixon and the Jolt Effect. Great book. I urge you to pick it up and read it if you haven't. very compelling and thought-provoking. FOMO is the fear of missing out. And a lot of times sellers will play up on that by saying, here's our price. If you buy by the end of the month or the end of our sales quarter, we'll give you a 15% discount. You know, this price is only available for a short period of time. And what that does in today's economic environment is it actually slows the sales down, because in late stages of the proposal stage, FOMO is not the most important factor. FOMO is, and FOMO is fear of messing up. So that's why the customers, your plan for their success and the people that are involved in it is so critical. So Craig, before I go on, there's one more thing that I want to introduce that is critical to making all this work. And before I do that, I just want to stop for your thoughts and input.
I once, I think I was telling you this, I didn't realize how important this part was until I was up on stage and I was talking about the need for the proposal to tell the value story. And so I was up there, it was like three really, besides me, obviously I was the low man on the totem pole. There were some big CROs from big companies, and they're like, well, you know, what are some of the big things you can go do? And I mentioned this idea of like the proposal being focused on a story, a value story and whatnot. And I just thought it was I just thought it was obvious and or not going to really catch. And then they all wanted to talk about it, and everyone wanted to talk about it. And afterwards, everyone was talking about, oh my God, and we don't do a really good job of that. And so, for me, that was like, okay, wow, like we do need to do this. And certainly I've received really good proposals and I've received really bad ones. And I think as you said, and you reiterated, in today's world, the proposal will get passed around to people that will say no. We have to combat that by making sure that story is so buttoned up and complete that, that we can get these deals through, which they're not doing today. And I think this is one of the key pieces. And then, like you said, the most important thing is if you don't have the big three, you really can't do it. If you haven't developed that the whole time, then it's very hard to go do.
Exactly. And Craig, I've run a number of workshops around the big three proposal, and it's really interesting because what I typically do is I ask for the sellers different proposals. And I then run an exercise where they are a buyer for a fictitious company that we've made up, and I share with them three different proposals, one of which is based on the big three, one of which is extremely Spartan, and a third which is really their proposal and the format of their proposal without their words for a different fictitious solution. And in 90% of the cases, when I ask them, which proposal are you going to invest in, sellers do not pick the proposals that most resemble what they're presently providing. So it's really interesting. They would not respond well to what they're providing as proposals. And then as sellers, we go and we follow a practice that we wouldn't really love as a buyer. So there's one thing, Craig, that in listening to all these calls, I have to bring this up. And it's an unexciting item, and it's an essential game changer for most sellers. And it is missing in so many calls that I'm listening to. It's not that hard to do. However, you can't assume it's so simple that they'll do it. And that is meeting management. And how sellers introduce the meeting sets the trajectory for success or failure. Probably all heard the metaphors. If the trajectory of a rocket launches off just 1 centimeter, by the time it gets up into space, it's going to be off by miles. Same thing here with sellers meeting introductions. And Craig, I can save everyone a lot of time. If you did this before every call, I believe there'd be about an 80% correlation to you being able to determine whether the meeting was going to go well. And that is, before the call, ask a seller to share with you if the meeting goes perfectly, what's the outcome, and listen to their response. Because when I do that, I get all sorts of answers, a lot of them that concern me. And I can tell before I even listen to the call or go into the call that it's going to have a really hard time going very well. And sellers are good at giving meeting agendas. They struggle defining the purpose of calls, and they struggle articulating the outcome. You know, first, if you don't know where you're going, it's really unlikely you're going to end up there. And second, if you don't share where you're trying to go with the buyer, they're going to have a hard time following you at times and understanding what the net result should be. And it's a great way to set up the closing part of a call. So what I want to introduce is the POW. Begin with the POW. POW. The POW is the glue that makes successful meetings. It's very simple. It's a written and verbal description of the purpose, agenda, and outcome of a meeting. It's preceded by icebreakers during the actual call, and it's proceeded by questions to ensure buy-in, such as, does this look like a good use of our time today? Does this meet your expectations for the call? And preceded by a question confirming the timing. Because how many times have you experienced a meeting where the buyer ran out and we hadn't finished, quote, covering all the material? And how many times have we found that there wasn't the time that we thought we had? So this is a really successful way for introducing meetings. And I encourage companies that are doing enterprise selling for any type of serious deal to share the POW, particularly for an executive level meeting, in advance with the key stakeholder or champion to get their input. It will save a lot of misfires and save that rocket from stalling and falling back down to earth. So what does the POW look like? Pretty simple. P, the purpose. It's just one sentence declaring the main topic, not a paragraph, not a soliloquy, not a limerick, not a novel. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss your ideal customer profile. Then it gives short bullet points. Think bullet points, not sentences or paragraphs. Don't step all over your material is the expression. So if you're in agreement today, Craig, we'll cover the following: the Big 3 discovery framework, the Big 3 demo framework, and the Big 3 proposal. The outcome of today's meeting is to determine what tool you want to apply first and how to execute on it. Most meeting outcomes are tied to one of four things. It's to brainstorm, to develop, to agree upon, or decide. If there's not a clear action verb in the written POW or the verbal POW, it's unlikely that it's gonna be much harder to get to a tangible outcome. This is similar to Sandler's upfront contract. And I'll also say that I've gone in and done consulting engagements and gave them all these frameworks, discovery framework, demo, here's a whole framework for multi-threading. And they'll come back at the end and tell me I had a company tell me this, the most valuable thing we got out of the engagement was the POW. And they said, Robert, we've now implemented this for all company meetings because the CEO loved it so much and found it to be a very effective framework. So I want to summarize things and the sales tactics for success in today's tough selling environment. And the theme here is the Big 3 selling process. We want to identify their main goal, their Big 3 challenges, and then message or pitch to those, do discovery around, prescriptive discovery around those Big 3 challenges, demo to those Big 3 challenges. If your company runs trials, try to run the trial around one or all of those 3 big challenges, and then the Big 3 proposal. How do we address those Big 3 challenges? And we also discussed the POW, start with a pow, to set up the success for all of your meetings, no matter what the content or topic or the sales stage of that meeting. Craig, before I go to, I want to mention that everybody will receive a copy of the deck today. They'll also receive a copy of the recording, and I'm going to show in a minute who you can reach out to for more information on the tools of the Big Three sales process, as well as more information about the framework or the workshops that we run around it. Before I do that, I just want to pause for other comments that are coming up for you and any questions that we've gotten from the audience.
You had a cheering section. Are you ready? Can I read this to you from my good friend Sandra? And if you know her, she has this huge smile on her face when she's writing it, like high energy. Okay, but I can't do it because I can't match her energy. And as we move to the customer phase, let's focus on the big three as we onboard and enable. 3 is a magic number.
Amen. Customer success will love this, particularly if you share the Big Three discovery framework with them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandra. Just another side question for you, which is just any other tips on, let's say someone wanted to do a rollout of everything you just mentioned, and I know there's more. How do you do that? Like, is there a good enablement best practice there? Because you can't do it all at once, but we need to change things right away. So what's the best way to do that?
I'll tell you what my learning's been over the last 5 years, Craig, is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Same thing here. Pick one stage or one set of skills within a stage, focus on that, roll it out, practice, coach, do additional practice, and measure the success, and then move on to demo. So for instance, I've rolled out discovery and really focused an entire quarter just on discovery. And I worked very closely with the CRO and the VP of sales in my role as a sales enablement leader at that point. And we just made the entire theme of 1 quarter discovery. And then we moved over to the demo. Because in my experience, most companies will try to tackle this with 1 2-hour session on discovery, demo, proposal, for example. And then they don't follow up with the coaching and it falls flat. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that we did this all in under an hour. So that was incredible. I'll hand it back to you. No more questions on our side.
So if you want more information on the tools, have questions, or want more information on workshops related to the Big Three, please reach out to Anisha at Scale. You see her email address, write it down, contact her, and we will get back to you. Really appreciate the opportunity, Craig, as always, and I look forward to listening to more calls. Yes, it's tough sometimes, and it also is thrilling when I start to see the improvement.
Excellent work, Robert, and Charles and Sandra agree with me on that. Oh, and Daryl. All right, we're doing good. I love it. Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you, Daryl.
Buzzer beater on the compliment. I like that. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. As Robert said, Anisha can help facilitate intros, content, etc. And thanks again, Robert. And take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.